This is Kelly Sadler, the commentary editor at the Washington Times, and this is the Washington Times Politically Unstable. Today, we are joined by Fred Fleitz. He is the vice chair of AFPI Center for American Security. He was the chief of staff to President Trump's National Security Council in his first term. He's a former CIA analyst and House Intelligence Committee staff member. He's got many titles, but has in-depth knowledge of what is going on in Iran right now and the protests that are happening there, and wrote a column for us featured in the commentary section at the Washington Times. And Fred, I just wanted to start with you is how do these protests differ from the protests that have happened historically in Iran that never led to a regime change?
Kelly, it's great to be here. There's been 6 large protests since 2009, and at least 2 of them spread to 100 Iranian cities. One of them resulted in over 500 killed. These protests are much larger. They spread much faster than the previous protests. We don't know whether they're going to succeed. This is a ruthless regime that has considerable capability with its military, with the Revolutionary Guard, to use violence to put down the protests. But it is clearly weakening the regime even further. I think each protest has a cumulative effect in weakening the legitimacy of this regime. And even if it does succeed in putting down these protests with brutal attacks, and we could be talking about thousands killed, it really has destroyed the legitimacy of this regime. It is going to come down, hopefully, in these protests.
Why are these protests different? What do the Iranian people see differently than they did back in 2019? What has led up to them? What has been the straw that could break the camel's back?
Well, they started in the Grand Bazaar in late December because of the crash of the Iranian rial, the Iranian currency. Iran's economy has been in trouble for a long time because of mismanagement and very serious sanctions. One reason the sanctions are so serious is because the Iranian regime refuses to negotiate to end its pursuit of nuclear weapons. These sanctions increased substantially in September when the UK, France, and Germany snapped back sanctions that had been lifted by the fraudulent 2015 nuclear deal. And in addition to that, this regime was humiliated last June when Israel and the United States destroyed Iran's nuclear missile programs, attacked government buildings, military facilities, and the Iranian military was powerless to stop them. The Iranian people know this. It hurt Iran, the reputation of the government, not just around the world, but with the Iranian people.
You know, there's been blackouts. The Iranian government has imposed nationwide blackouts there. They've shut down the internet. It's really hard to know what's going on the ground from America, being an independent journalist. We know what the president has said. He said that if protesters are killed, there will be U.S. action. We know this week he has a meeting with his top national security advisors, the Secretary of War, the Secretary of State, to discuss potential U.S. actions. The president has been supportive of the protesters. What should President Trump do right now?
Well, concerning information, electricity, this is what dictatorships and autocracies do. They cut information so demonstrators can't talk to each other, so they don't know what's going on, so the outside world doesn't know what's going on. We really have to give a lot of thanks to Elon Musk for making his Starlink system available for free to Iranians so they can communicate. That's why we're actually seeing what's going on in Iran, despite the government's efforts to close off all information. And they are jamming Starlink, but there are some ways around that. It's a satellite-based system. You have to have a receiver to use it. There are ways to jam it, but it's difficult and it's frankly dangerous. They have to use microwaves to jam it. But I think a very important aspect of these demonstrations is the strong support of President Trump. You may remember in 2009 and in 2022, when there were large demonstrations, Obama and Biden did not stand with the Iranian people. Obama was afraid to during very large demonstrations when Ahmadinejad's fraudulent presidential reelection was protested. Obama didn't want to offend the regime because he wanted to negotiate his fraudulent nuclear deal. President Trump standing with the demonstrators is very important. It shows them that they're not alone, but the U.S. has to do more. Europe has not said nearly enough. We need to have every European leader making it clear that this is unacceptable and that they stand with these protesters.
It's one of the funny things to me is everyone stands with Ukraine, but at the Golden Globes last night, there was barely a mention of what's happening in Iran. And also, from the mainstream media, the biggest story heading into this week were ICE protests happening out in Minneapolis, and the clash between them and the protesters. Nothing really being said or mentioned about what's happening in the Middle East, which could be very formative, no?
It's scandalous. These are people who are risking their lives for freedom. They will be executed for protesting if the Iranian government arrests them. Unfortunately, there's politics here. I think many on the left and the mainstream media, they don't want to stand with the demonstrators because Trump stands with the demonstrators. It's outrageous. And fortunately, that's starting to change. Even with the BBC, you probably heard reports the BBC was not putting news about this on their website. Instead, they were talking about that ICE incident in Minnesota. Popular pressure in the UK forced the BBC to change their tune. I hope that happens in this country too.
Now, you were saying that European leaders need to be much more vocal. What do we need to see from our European allies in order to spark some change? What could be change in Iran?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to have clear statements of support for the Iranian protesters. We should consider other things too, such as expelling Iranian diplomats and anything affiliated with the Iranian government should be thrown out. There should be new sanctions. Iranian financial assets abroad should be seized. And I've talked to some conservatives, Kelly, who said, well, why do we want to get involved in this? We're America first. We don't want to get involved in new wars. This is a nation that's been at war with us for decades. This is a nation that sent assassination squads to kill former Trump officials. This is a nation that killed hundreds of American soldiers in Iraq with IEDs. It's a state sponsor of terror. It is, in my mind, a special case in terms of an evil regime at war with our country. And I'm with Newt Gingrich. This is a time to stand unabashedly with these protesters to bring this regime down while it's vulnerable.
Somewhat to the point that you just made, in your piece, you were saying the significance of some of these protesters saying death to Palestine, not death to America, not death to Israel. Can you talk about the people who are living in Iran right now? They're going through economic collapse. They can't it's hard to access necessities like water and electricity. Yet they've seen this regime send billions of dollars to Hezbollah, to Hamas, to all of their terror proxies across the world. And you said that is getting under the skin of these average Iranians.
Well, there was an interesting instance reported in the media. I think it's true, but we can't confirm it, that an Iranian official was trying to lead chants of death to America and death to Israel with a bunch of Iranian students. And they responded by saying, death to Palestine. And I think this just reflects that the Iranian people, especially students, they're tired of billions of dollars of the country's wealth being spent on weapons to destroy the state of Israel, to attack the United States, when they don't have clean air, they don't have water, they don't have jobs. It's not just corruption, it's mismanagement of resources on things that have hurt the livelihood of the Iranian people. The Iranian people don't want to destroy Israel. They don't want to be at war with the United States. They want their country back. That's what's behind these protests.
Fred, what do you think the likelihood is that the regime will fall on its own because of these protests? And then what happens? We saw this in Syria with the fall of Assad. But I mean, what happens? How is that going to shift global dynamics?
My friend Michael Ledeen, the greatest Iran expert ever, he passed away last year. He was always telling me the end of this regime is in sight. And I think it is in sight. I wish Michael was alive today to see what's happening right now on the ground in Iran. But I don't think we can underestimate the ruthlessness of this radical Islamist regime to kill the people to stay in power. That's why there has to be outside help. That's why I'm glad President Trump is going to have a high-level meeting on Tuesday of this week with his staff to talk about what should be done. What we shouldn't do is give them time. The Iranians say, hey, now we want to talk about the nuclear deal again. No, I'm sorry. We can't give this regime any leverage, any leeway while they're under pressure.
The president has mentioned, he did mention just yesterday, that he was still open to talks with the Iranian regime regarding their nuclear program. Where does Israel stand in all of this? Because, they would arguably be the greatest benefactor if the Iranian regime toppled.
I think the president is open to talks, but the talks will be your government has to allow for free elections. You have to stop oppressing your people. We're not going to just strike a deal with them and say we're going to lower the pressure on your country. That's off. This is a state that wants to destroy the state of Israel. It is an existential threat to Israel. It fired missiles at Israel twice last year. It was behind the Hamas terrorist attack. It's been backing terrorist proxies that have been at war with Israel for decades. This is why Israel took the extraordinary step last June to actually attack Iran with hundreds and hundreds of airstrikes because Iran's nuclear program was getting too close to using nuclear weapons that Israel believes, and I believe, would have been used against Israel. So stopping this nation, shutting down this Islamist regime would be of enormous benefit to Israel's security, but also to global security.
How many agents of Mossad are on the ground in Iran right now? I know that a lot of our intelligence stems from them, and they had a very successful operation preceding the 12-day war in taking out top lieutenants and targeting them specifically where they lived in surprise attacks. The intelligence that was on display last year between U.S. and Israeli sources was breathtaking in nature. And so I'm just wondering, like, how reliable is the information that President Trump is getting? We know he said he's going to retaliate or have negotiations, but is Israel the prime source of the intelligence?
Well, I certainly don't know how many agents of Mossad has on the ground, but just to give you some perspective for what happened before the 12-day war, the Mossad set up a base outside of Tehran, and they used it to conduct precision drone attacks to take out nuclear scientists and senior military officials and to commit acts of sabotage. There were numerous Mossad sources within the Iranian government. This made what happened during the 12-day war even more embarrassing because Iran's intelligence services are so inept, they allowed this to happen. So I think right now there's a Mossad presence there. I don't know what it's doing. I don't frankly think I'd say if I did, but I'm sure it is getting accurate information out of the country for the U.S. and Israeli governments.
What do you think the timeline is on this? Because when these protests first erupted, there was a lot of speculation that they would be short-lived. That they wouldn't continue on. And here we are. They are continuing. They seem to only be intensifying. What do you think President Trump's timeline is for action? And whether or not something is going to come of these protests or fizzle out?
I think the president will take action fairly soon. And this could mean cutting off shipments of small arms from Russia, China, and Iran, kicking out diplomats, maybe conducting airstrikes against the Revolutionary Guard Corps and military units that are being used to attack the crowds. I don't think that's going to get the crowds to back up the Iranian regime. They're against this regime. But in terms of a timetable on when Iran might be free, first of all, no one thought this demonstration would get so large so fast, so it's hard to guess this. I fear it probably will take many months of demonstrations to beat this regime until it decides to fold. But I have to say, I just don't know. This is really new territory. We've never seen a demonstration grow so fast, so quickly.
And Fred, lastly, a lot of people are scared about power vacuums, especially in the Middle East. The U.S.'s role in the Middle East with regime change has not been very successful. There's a souring mood within the country of getting involved in these sort of conflicts. So to the people that are skeptical, like even if the regime does fall, they don't want U.S. boots on the ground, conducting free and fair elections that may or may not take place for a leadership that may or may not be there and guide the country, forward in a positive direction.
I think there are real serious questions of what happens if the supreme leader government falls. Will it be taken over by a military government? The former Shah's son would like to lead the country in a democratic transition. There are many Iranians who believe that's a good idea. There are many who do not. They don't want the Shah's son back because they thought the Shah was an oppressive dictator himself. I don't think he is. I think he'd be a good man to run the country. And he's living in the United States. He served in the U.S. Air Force. I think he's someone who we could work with, who would be good for the people. I do fear there's going to be a power vacuum. There really aren't leaders on the ground leading a democratic transition, a campaign for freedom. So I think there's going to be some rough times ahead, even if the government falls.
All right. Fred Fleitz, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it.
It's good to be here.